just gonna keep saying I'm ready to fight over and
Ready
over
to fight.
again.
This is the opposite of last episode, when you were like,
I know, I noticed.
you were
and
like, my favorite thing in the world is when Phil loves something more than I do. And now I'm like, never again.
Well, you don't this time. Although I don't know your feelings on the book as much. I mean, I know generally positive. We shouldn't reveal anything yet.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing.
I think maybe you should tell the audience what my feelings on the book are.
I'm not gonna do that. I would never take that away from you. I'm mostly going to be asking you about Lee Pace throughout this episode.
I'm gonna have to stay fairly low key on the Lee Pace. Just a fair warning.
I'm not really going
I'm
to
not
talk
gonna
about
just
it.
tell stories out of school.
Like literal out of high school.
Yes.
Hi, welcome to Pizza Toast. It's a podcast about middle grade and YA novels and the TV and film adaptations thereof. We've been talking about Twilight. We're going to wind up the actual original series by talking about the second half of the book. And it is the second half, which I hadn't really thought of. Like
Of Breaking
I thought
Dawn.
It was just the
Of
last
Breaking
third,
Dawn.
but it is a very long back half. And the corresponding film, Breaking Dawn, Part 2. And my name is Christy.
And my name is Phil. And yes. And when you say we cover YA and high school age stuff and junior high school age stuff, we are, as we hinted at up top, going to be discussing actual high school stuff, because I did go to high school with one of the actors in this movie.
Yeah, my connection to Taylor Lautner, fairly tenuous. My connection to one of the bit players, two of the bit players in the Hunger Games series, little stronger, have interviewed them. But you actually did high school theater with one of the many ancillary vampires in this movie.
One of the many ancillary vampires in this movie actually stayed at my house for a long weekend. And we hung out all, like, he was actually a friend. He was in our prom group.
Oh, that's adorable.
As a freshman, he got to go to prom as a freshman in high school because a senior girl really wanted to go out to prom with him. He looked kind of like one of the Smurflings at the time. He was incredibly tiny. I know that it's hard to imagine. He was a tiny little boy, like undersized.
It's so interesting because now Super Yaki literally sells t-shirts that say Lee Pace is 6'5".
Yes. He is a very, very tall man.
Lee Pace plays one of the standout New Mutants in this movie.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Because, make no mistake, as you said, this is an X-Men story done better.
This is an X-Men story. It's not done better than an X-Men movie, but it's definitely... The Twilight series is as well written, probably better written than anything Chris Claremont ever wrote for the X-Men. I'm coming right out and saying it. X-Men comics were not very well plotted or written or characterized. Anyone who makes fun of Twilight for being kind of trashy, badly written fiction, but also throws themselves onto the spikes of the classic X-Men or the greatest thing ever committed to paper, have no legs to stand on. Those things are borderline unreadable.
It is funny how super heroic and super team this is by the end of it, especially the way the final fight.
Yes.
And I have a lot to say about said final fight. It's staged. It looks very what if Avengers Endgame climactic sequence, but cold outside.
Yes. What if they didn't have time to render the entire airport in Civil War and had to just fight on the most blank field you've ever seen in a movie?
There's so much here, though, that now I'm like, well, Twilight did this first, which is an interesting thought.
Yes.
And I like the superhero-powered vampires. I like them a lot. I think they add a lot of fun color to the book, which, okay, the book begins with Bella's transformation into a vampire.
Yes.
And in the movie, we never get the wonderful, horrific description of how much pain Bella is in as she turns into a vampire. The movie just has to skate right over that because it is all internal monologue. It's all really well done. And it's awful to read. Just a nightmare sequence.
Yeah, Stephanie Meyer said it's the longest part of the book it ever took her to write. Like, she spent the most time... It's like 3 chapters of just description of how horrible it is to turn into a vampire, which good because the 3 books previous have been building to this constantly, telling us how horrible it is to turn into a vampire.
The thing that kept getting me during this whole sequence is like she's talking about how it feels like there are flames covering different parts of her body, and how all she wants is relief from the burning, but if there is no burning, then there is just like ice coldness, and then there's like a fire in her throat as soon as she wakes up because she wants to drink some blood.
Yes.
She's temporarily distracted by the baby, but they go hunting very quickly and it's very fun, and that is basically what they jump straight to in the movie.
When you say jump straight to, we mean they jump straight to it. It's weird. I felt like the special effects in this movie were a step down from the special effects in Breaking Dawn Part 1. I felt like the wolves, the movement of the vampires, everything in Part 1 was very fluid, very cool looking, and that a lot of the vampire effects in this one felt like they were straight out of the first one, and I'm wondering if there was just a time crunch.
I think it's time.
On the effects.
Because there are things like the first and only time that we see Bella eating a mountain lion, like attacking it and eating it. It's really bad. And my favorite use of CG that is actually like pretty seamlessly handled, but still very silly, is when Bella realizes that all she has to do is like kick and punch a boulder to break it apart. It's fun. I thought that was she's delighted by this in the book, and everyone is delighted in the movie. There's like hooting and hollering for Bella displaying her strength. Oh, because as you mentioned while you're reading this book, Bella's the perfect vampire.
Right. That's her special power, is that she's better at being a vampire than any vampire who's ever lived. They manage to downplay it a bit as it goes along, as we figure out why she's kind of that way. But we also discover that her mutant power is her ability to not be affected by other vampires. But as in any X-Men, your mutant ability is actually, there's a greater level to it. So she's not just able to fend off other vampires' powers, she's able to actually expand the shield, Violet, whatever her name is in the Incredibles style, and like protect everyone around her from other vampires, which is a cool power. And one thing the book does that I love that the movie is just unable to do because the movie's not 18 hours long is just get nerdy and nitpicky about the limits of their abilities. What happens if she pushes the shield out, but it encompasses a person who's trying to use their vampire powers? Because then all of a sudden you're trapped in the bubble of her shield, even though you're an enemy. Like it goes into all the nerdy nitty gritty that I'm like, oh, Stephanie Meyer, who has admitted that the X-Men comics were an influence on this book, is a superhero. You can tell she just loves that nerdy stuff.
And the thing that I really like that they're not able to accomplish in the movie, because, like, as you said, it's not 18 hours long, is there are specific members of the vampire squad they build that are able to help Bella with her power because their powers have some overlap with it, or it's in some way the offensive power coming up against her defensive power is the best way for her to learn how to use it. So, like, this character Zafrina, who can basically conjure mind pictures and make people think they're somewhere else or seeing something else, helps Bella learn how to control the shield as she's like, can you make people stop seeing this thing? And then Kate, whose power is Electro. Her power is Electro. Yeah. She's one of the Denali clan. She emerges in the movie as one of my favorites. I think the actor playing her is very charming and has a good tete-a-tete with Lee Pace. And they're romantic couple.
Which actor? Which which actor is she?
It's Kate, and I do not remember her name.
That's I was going through all of the actors. It's not the Tick's Valerie Curry, who plays one of the other Denali vampires.
You're gonna have to forgive me for not reading the 6,000 word closing credits of Breaking Dawn Part 2.
You're thinking of Casey LeBeau, the
I
actress.
really
Casey
like
LeBeau.
her, and both her and Tanya looked very familiar to me, but I've not really seen them in anything. They just have that look about them. Tanya looks like 7 other Hollywood actors, so that's not her fault.
Right.
And there's not much impact she makes for being kind of an important figure.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, jumping off what you said, is one thing the book does really well that unfortunately we don't get in the movie, and you don't get this in a lot of superhero movies, that in superhero comics and superhero fiction, it's really cool when they manage to make a team, all of their powers are important. Like everything they can do, they work together to help defeat whatever they need to defeat. And as you said, so much of this section of the book is devoted to sort of weaving together, not just that, but like how Alice's perceptions, you have to keep certain things like unknown to certain vampires because the Volturi have a mind reader. So only certain vampires can know certain things at certain times. There's a lot of the book cover is a chess board, and it's a lot of pieces that Meyer does a really good job at moving around so that it all kind of clicks into place at the end. Strangely enough, a lot of it doesn't even need to click into place because she manages to do the thing that X-Men rarely do, which is talk their way out of a situation.
And I love this, and this is I really like the movie mostly because it is like, let's form a super team. I love to see a super team formed. Some of my favorite comics, because I used to read a lot of comics. A shocker to everyone listening. These used to be a big part of my life, particularly Marvel comics and like the Marvel Now relaunch of a lot of titles. I love not the Avengers because we've seen them done too many times before. I love the Secret Avengers and I love the Young Avengers because these are people who are differently gifted from it's not just super strength. It's like, let's punch our way into another dimension. Let's be the world's best assassin and very irritating to the rest of the team. Because Deadpool is actually a good comics character, and I'll go to the mat for that. But I really love seeing a bunch of misfits thrown together, or in the case of Young Avengers, it's a lot of people who are not familiar with fighting together with anyone because they're young. Here, you have a lot of people who are very resistant to fighting in general because it's just not what they do, especially when they're up against the Volturi. But once the baby touches their face, they're powerless against her charm. Oh, the baby. I don't want to say the name. If we can avoid saying the name, that would be really cool for me.
Nessie the little dinosaur. So
Nessie is actually kind of cute. Let's be that name.
And we get a good laugh line off of it. A laugh line that is in the novel, and we get the "You Name My Kid After Loch Ness Monster," a line which gets made fun of in ironic Twilight circles, like a stupid line from Twilight, where I'm like, I think it's intentionally it's a goofy line. It's intentionally goofy, and it's also a totally reasonable thing for Bella to be annoyed at Jacob about. Yeah, and it undercuts the tension very nicely. There's a lot of drama going on.
There's so much Bella can be annoyed at Jacob about in the first little bit of the second half of the book.
Now, you said last episode that you didn't feel Breaking Dawn warranted being split into 2 movies, but I felt one of my criticisms on this film is that it's very rushed at times. They introduce 15 characters in about a 5-minute gap that they then kind of expect you to know who they are. Most of them don't have a line, and almost all of them are played by television actors it's a lot of it's stunt casting. You're going to recognize these faces, but they're never going to speak to you. And like the X-Men, oh boy, if they're from Ireland, they're dressed like they just stepped out of steerage on the Titanic. If they're from South America, you better bet they just stepped out of a jungle and are wearing loincloths.
Yeah, I don't love. I'm not crazy about the styling of the women from the Amazon, and especially because they're like fairly important characters who like
Yeah.
particularly Zafrina, who is the one who can project images into other people's minds. She forms a very strong connection with Renesmee. I'll say it because Renesmee's power ends up being she can touch your face and show you her memories.
Yeah.
She can show you. She can perfectly conjure a thing that just happened. If she has a question about a thing that just happened, she'll kind of show what her perspective was on it. This is before she is verbal. Although she continues to use this a lot after she starts talking. By the end of the book, I think she's supposed to look about like 6 or 7 years old. She develops quickly. This is why we get the Volturi conflict, because Arena... Why is she... There's no reason for her to be there, by the way. Like, why is she even there in the first place?
She's just a neighbor. She's a neighbor. She's just
She's
walking through the woods.
She lives in Alaska.
That is neighbor. That's like living in Alaska. Alaska to Washington for a vampire is like the olden days when your closest neighbor was like a mile and a half away. Like, it's kind of like that. Like, they could she's just zipping around, and then she sees Renesmee jump in about 100 feet into the air to catch a snowflake, which I don't think happens in the book. In the book, she's just hanging out with Jacob.
She's hanging out with Jacob, and she does look to all the world like an immortal child, because she has the vampire vibe. And immortal children, I am delighted by the visual explanation we get of them in this movie. It's the most like straight horror we've seen in this series since Eclipse, I would say. Like, because we get Dakota Fanning throwing a toddler who's just destroyed a village into a fire. Pretty great.
She yeets a baby into the fire like it's nothing. Like it's a sack of garbage. Also, a noticeably older Dakota Fanning in this movie from the last time we saw her. When we first meet Dakota Fanning in the series, she is a teeny petite. Now she is a college student, and there's just no way they can hide that. Like, she looks older, and it was the only time I was like, I really wish they made her face down a little bit so that because the genius of this movie is they didn't just cast a bunch of babies and little kids as Renesmee at different ages. They cast a bunch of babies and little kids, and then using the magic of computers, took the face of the child playing regular age Renesmee and sort of grafted it on to these increasingly younger children, so that when you're talking to them, it's like you're talking to a boglin or one of those little old man puppets you stuck your fingers in and kind of did this. Like this you got...
I don't usually send you screen caps of what we're doing, like what we're watching. This is the one time I had to, because the faces that that she makes when she's a baby and a toddler are so grotesque, but also I can't stop looking at them because there's something very endearing.
Especially because the baby is just a baby. Yes. But they want her eyes to be recognizable is the big thing. So they've grafted a fake face over a regular baby face that doesn't always line up with the head it's on. Like, it sort of slides around the head in that early 2000s fake CGI way. That's weird, because this was only 10 years ago. They had done this successfully many times in movies at this point.
Well, also, because she still has to look like a half vampire after it's just Mackenzie Foy playing her, like, at her age, she still looks kind of weird. Like, it's still an uncanny valley thing about this actual little girl.
She looks kind of weird, but that's okay because they're vampire. Like, they all look kind of weird. Like, I'm okay with the vampire family looking weird. Or as Alana said, as she was watching this movie with me, and saw Edward for the first time, oh my God, he's grotesque. He's disgusting.
So you two are still together, right?
So Alana, I convinced Alana to watch this movie with me. She swears she's seen a Twilight movie. She can't remember which, nor does she remember anything about it. She watched some of it with Mitzi. Even though I'd be like, you've never seen a Twilight. She's like, I did. I watched part of one with Mitzi once. But the whole time she's like, who is this? I'm like, that's Jacob. Which one is he? He's the werewolf. She hated Edward so much because she thinks Robert Pattinson looks like a creep, which he kind of does. I mean, I admit it. She hated every character. To be
so wrong, though.
She hated every character. She hated everything that happened. She hated the way everything looked and the way everyone talked and everything about them. Like, she was visibly upset. She just watched this terrible comedy on streaming called Bar Fight! That was one of the worst comedies I've ever like walked in and out of, like just sort of as I came in, like, and she was like, Bar Fight was better than this. And it was unfair of her to say. So she did not care for, but again, it's the 5th movie in a series that's already more or less concluded. I was just curious to see what happened.
This is like a postlude because, I mean, the general plot here is, well, we have to have some kind of conflict now that everything's like the dust has settled.
Yeah.
Why don't we make it that Irina, the kind of self-made cast-off from the Denali clan, see Renesmee, think she's an immortal child, which is this verboten thing that the Volturi does their best to eliminate everywhere it happens. It hasn't happened in however many years. Goes to the Volturi, and the Volturi is like, well, this is unacceptable. We better go see what's going on and confirm what she said. So Edward's idea is that they gather... No, is it Carlisle's idea? I think it's
Carlisle and Edward, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. One of them is, or one or both of them are like, hey, let's gather a bunch of witnesses just so they can confirm for us, like, and for the Volturi that Renesmee is not an immortal child. And then the Volturi shows up. In the book, they're like... We get a lot more Caius in the book.
Mm-hmm.
He's very vocal in the book. In the movie, it's mostly just Michael Sheen being whatever it is that he does as Aro, having the time of his life.
That's what we pay for. Like, we paid for this.
Do you have on... I mean, like, I did have to go back and rewatch The Giggle, like, a few times.
The Giggle was good.
He has an incredible laugh the first time you see it.
It is funny, though, because in switching the perspective of the main Volturi, they had to do a few, like, scriptural gymnastics to get them back into the correct positions they needed to be in at the end, because, again, he's not the one who does most of the negotiating in the book. So he's not... So they had to, like, make him the evil one, and then the good one, and then the evil one again. Like, it has to, like... Because
the
more...
his mind a lot.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the reason he ultimately opts to be a upstanding and just is because he knows he would die otherwise, which is fun. In the book, he just eventually sees reason because they have a conversation like adults.
Which is great. The book got a lot of criticism when it came out because for 4 books, we've been building to this confrontation with the Volturi. And then when it happens, it's just a long talk on the ice. It's not just talk. There's a lot of mind games going on and a lot of like people trying to use their powers and Bella having to throw her shield out and like a lot of that. But when it comes to the movie, they're like, we can't just have them standing around on the ice, like frowning at each other, which is what it would look like. So they pull off probably the coolest plot coup in the history. A plot coup that's only cool once because you're not expecting it if you're not expecting it. But they throw and basically did it just to upset the kids in the audience. Like,
as a reader of the book, when the fight scene starts, the first time you see it, and you don't know that that's going to happen, it is so disorienting. So you're like, this isn't how this story ends. I want my happy ending to this story. It's so much neater. And what is going on? How are this many people dying? And you really, it works. Like, they threaded the needle with it, where you are convinced, because Carlisle is the first real casualty. And at that point, you're like, well, they're not going to hold anything back if they're killing Daddy. So,
right. But it still makes sense because you're like, they can do that. They still have an out. They've killed one vampire. We can get a scuffle here. you can lose Carlisle and still have the end of the book. That's fine. But yeah, once they start killing werewolves, once they start killing all of our favorite characters, the reports, I can't remember what show it was I was listening to when this movie first came out, but the report was that the opening night audience was literally full of screaming, crying teenagers because they went expecting what the movies had been up to that point, which was exact faithful adaptations of the books. And all of a sudden you see Carlisle get his head ripped off, Alice get her head ripped off, like, and you're like, oh, and these children are in the audience, like, wailing because this is not how it's supposed to go. It's a pretty funny thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's inescapable by now to have been on the internet as long as we have and not heard the audio of, like, opening night audiences then finding out that this is all an illusion. So
Yes.
for a long portion of the book, Alice disappears. Everyone feels abandoned by Alice. Alice left a couple cryptic clues to give basically Bella an escape plan for Renesmee and Jacob. Because Alice, in her infinite wisdom, and, like, this is one of those things where, like, Alice is very manipulative, but she has it's an ends to justify the means thing. So she's like, you're going to want, if you and Edward are going to die, which is very possible, then you, Bella, should ship off Renesmee and maybe do that with Jacob as well. And that's what she does. She gets them.
But please don't ship off Renesmee and Jacob in this fan fiction sense. We don't need that yet.
No, they are like big brother and little sister. Because they do, Meyer does an all right job of making it not creepy, I think. Yeah. The imprinting. Because it's acknowledged that this could be creepy, but it really is just that Jacob and Renesmee have this, like, familial connection that doesn't feel predatory. There's one joke about it in the movie that makes it gross, but aside from that, they do an all right job there, too. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And this is part of that Stephenie Meyer thing where, okay, you have a character who can see into the future. How do you have conflict now? Because she can tell you what's going to happen. Well, you make her the target of the bad guys who want her power. So she has to leave so she doesn't fall into their hands. But also, she can't reveal anything she knows to any of the vampires except Bella, because all of the other vampires can have their minds read by the bad guys. So only Bella can know, but you can't tell Bella because then Edward can find out. And, like, it makes sense that she has to set things up this way. Now, I think she probably could have left a better clue, but I think that maybe she knows if the clue is going to work, I guess.
You don't think that The Merchant of Venice was a good
Well, Stephenie Meyer said The Merchant of Venice was a big influence on this story because it ends not with a fight, but with a long argument between the opposing sides where the leader of the argument talks the bad guy into backing down, and that's how they win. And so she's like, she wanted a Merchant of Venice ending where it all builds to basically a courtroom scene, and that's the dramatic highlight of the story. And so she changed, I think the original book was supposed to be like Jane Eyre, and she was like, she changed it to Merchant of Venice at the last minute.
Look, I can never stay mad at this woman. Like, I think Stephenie Meyer made so many good decisions. Also, Alice going away is not an entirely selfish decision. She is also going to find, if she can, the other the other human vampire hybrid child. Yes. Because there is one that exists, and she has the vaguest idea, and she has to move about the world until she can get a real vision conjured up. And then in the book, the ultimate deciding factor of this, like, them not coming to conflict with the Volturi is, here's another time this worked out historically. Yeah. Aro can touch that person. Aro can see, they are not lying. And then Aro has to go away because he doesn't go back on his word, for better or worse. I mean, he is what he is. I think Michael Sheen makes this character so much more interesting just by being buck wild. Like,
Right.
I don't think Aro's actually that interesting. Caius feels much more like a traditional villain. And then you have Marcus, who just seems bored all the time, which I love.
Who's barely in it. He just is like sort of glaring at everyone
I
most
love
of the
he's
time.
so happy to die in the in the fake fight.
Well, what's interesting is, so they set it up so that the Volturi, the vampires, all the other covens start figure out that what the Volturi do historically is they pass judgment over vampires who may have broken vampire rules. And their word is bond, and they have the final say. They get to execute you, whatever. And if a coven is found to be guilty of something, they just wipe out a whole coven. What you've discovered, though, is that historically they wipe out a whole coven, but then there's usually one or two who are like repentant, who get to join the Volturi. Well, wouldn't you know it? The ones who are usually repentant are the ones who have superpowers the Volturi want. So what they've determined is that the Volturi are looking for any excuse to wipe out the Cullens, so they can get the superpowered Cullens, specifically Alice. But I bet they'll take anyone who's got good powers.
They desperately want Alice in particular. I don't think they care as much about Jasper because his power is like, his power is
being a Southern gentleman. His powers being the Confederate with just a bunch of rebels.
Jasper looks kind of nice in this movie. This is the first time he doesn't look really, like, it's not harrowing to look at Jackson Rathbone in this movie. They did do a thing where a lot of the ancillary vampires are hot in a non-weird way. Like, they're just normal people.
Except for the one, like, hobo one. There's one hobo vampire. I can't remember his name. What is it? The guy who lives in the attic.
Alistair.
Alistair.
I remember this because he's played by Joe Anderson, and every time Joe Anderson is cast in a thing and doesn't sing, I get upset because he's in the Julie Taymor Across the Universe movie, and he sings all of the difficult male parts.
Is he the guy who was in Once on Broadway?
No.
That one of the vampires was the guy from Once on Broadway.
I bet it was the Irish one.
He only has one line. He's like, Shar and Bagara.
And, like, what's weird is, like, there is one bit of casting that is not stunt casting because no one knew who he was yet, but future Oscar winner Rami Malek is,
who's really good. He's so
charming.
He does that Rami Malek thing where he, like, looks up and he has a big smile on his face, and you're like, aw, this guy really likes being a vampire.
It's a lot less creepy than his usual thing. Like, he's not unnerving to look at in any way.
Yeah, he's the last airbender in this movie, by the way.
Absolutely, like, he can, and yeah, Avatar had existed for a while. Avatar the Last Airbender, not Avatar the Na'vi. But, like, this was like an existent property already, and he can bend all four elements. Like, this is just him being Aang.
He's the Avatar.
Yeah.
But I'll go on and say, realized better than in the movie The Last Airbender. It just pulls it off a lot better.
You will hear no argument from me on that particular thing, but I like him. He's fun, and there is actually like an interesting minor conflict going on there that she's able to dive into in the book with an extra like 20, like there's like 25 pages or so devoted to like how Benjamin, who's the leader Benjamin is the kid. That's Rami Malek. Amun is the leader of that coven, the Egyptian coven, and he wants to hone this kid into a weapon, but the kid is very resistant to that. It's just like, no, I would like to use my powers for good if I use them at all.
Yeah.
And that makes him like, I can see him being one of the ones who stays behind with the Cullens, because it seems like there's a lot of splintering positive at the end of the book. Like, the Lee Pace vampire, Garrett, who was, what do they call them? Nomads. They call a bunch of them nomads who are like covenless vampires. He joins the Denali clan because somewhere in this book, in the fringes, between the lines, which we don't see, him and Kate fall in love.
Right. They also have beefed up his role quite a bit. They've made him a much more visible character in the movie than he is. I mean, he's in the book, but so are a ton of other vampires who are kind of each get their own little moments. But they give Lee Pace a lot of moments. I feel like he had to have come on set, come to the first table read or whatever, and they were like, let's give the Pig Man a few more. I'm certain
they gave him more to do than he initially had to do. Because, like, even his introduction is extremely, like, the second he pops up, he attacks a guy who's, I think, singing like some kind of off British invasion song and attacks
Yeah.
him in the street. And then Rosalie and Emmett are like, "Come on now, you want to come with us?" And he's like, "Let me finish eating." It's all very cute.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that all the vampires who come to hang out with the Cullens are all human eaters. They are not vegetarians
Yes.
like the
Yeah,
Cullens.
except
They
the
are
Denali clan. So, like, everybody
right.
they enlist after that, and a few of them try out the vegetarian diet while they're there and do not like it.
Nope. And neither does Renesmee, by the way. She is not a fan of eating mountain lion. She would much rather.
Renesmee really likes blood bags specifically. There's a part where Bella says that her expression turns smug because they have to cut a hunting trip short. Pretty funny. Pretty funny, weird little baby.
Who also is allowed to age a lot quicker in the movie.
Yeah.
They get her up so she can walk around and she can talk and be an actress as opposed to being carried around most of the time as she is in the book. Also, Charlie finds out that Jacob is a werewolf.
I was just going to mention Charlie because I want to talk about how divergent they are in the book versus the movie.
Yeah. So Jacob reveals that he's a werewolf to Charlie by taking off all of his clothes and then turning into a monster in front of the man. We get to see it happen in the movie.
Pretty funny.
Yeah, it's played for laughs in the film.
But then Billy Burke does a good little horror reaction to this transformation. Like,
yeah.
Backs off, gets scared. Billy Burke doing top tier work in this, as he always is. In the movie, he wants to know everything. In the book, he wants to know nothing.
No. Yeah.
So it's in the book, it is tell me as little as possible. This is strictly need to know basis. In the movie, it's very much the other way around where Bella doesn't want to tell him anything and he would like to know everything and she puts the limitation on it.
And to be fair, she can't tell him anything because if he finds out about vampires, he'll be executed by the Volturi.
Mm-hmm.
So, which seems like a fine line, like it's a real letter of the law thing with the Volturi. Like he knows something's up. She's not a werewolf. But there's something going on where she'll never die and never age. So, also my favorite part of the book, it's left out of the movie, and I wish it was in the movie because it's my favorite exchange in the book, where you find out beyond a shadow of the doubt from the Volturi that that Jacob and his clan are not werewolves. It's my favorite part where the Volturi are like, "Oh, these aren't werewolves," and even all the wolves are like, "What?" He's like, no, werewolves our arch enemies are werewolves. They change into wolves at the full moon. They're werewolves. These are shapeshifters. That's like a whole other thing. And I'm like reading it. I'm like, yes. Like there are
It's woven in so flawlessly. It happens like pretty abruptly. It's basically an aside. It's like Stephanie and I are being like, hey, come a little closer. I know they're not werewolves. It's just been so much easier to call them werewolves this entire time.
Yeah, well, and they think they're werewolves. But I love the idea that there are werewolves in this world. We just never meet them. There's which opens up the possibility like there have to be Loch Ness monsters. There have to be black lagoons. There have to be Frankensteins. Like all of that exists in this world. And I desperately need Stephanie Meyer's versions of those things. I need the sort of not quite Disney zombies version of them because it would be Stephanie Meyer. So it would be a little more thoughtful, but she's got to have a wild take on these. How does how does a flesh-eating ghoul fit into the Mormon cosmology? Is just how I want to know.
No, I loved this for you. I had forgotten that there was this. So I forgot more about this book than I remembered. I mean, I remembered that there was no final conflict. I remembered that Bella took to being a vampire very well. I remembered that there was a whole cadre of new vampires. So I knew like the kind of like the Cliff's Notes. I didn't remember the movie almost at all. Like everything that happened in the movie was a complete surprise to me, minus the final battle. And I will again say we got a half a movie syndrome on our hands. This movie is all action. There's no rise to it. It's just assemble the team and let's get going the whole time. I don't have a problem with that. because it stays interesting the whole time for me. Also, I cried like I don't even know what at the end.
What did you cry at? That's my question. I'm not like being snarky. I need to know what you cried at.
I don't know. We hit. Okay, for one thing, it was that they cut to, for the credits, an animation of the book page, like the book turning to the final page, and they show the last lines of the book. And that made me tear up a little, because it's like, oh, that's such a nice tribute. Like, it's so nice that we're honoring the text. And then they just keep going with that motif. And they're playing a song that always gets me, because it is engineered to get you. It is an off-album version of Christina Perri's 1,000 Years, which is a lovely song. And the second that kicks in, and then they start showing All My Friends... that I've been spending so much time with, because we talked about this. Every movie should have this. They show every character, and superimpose the name over it, and we hit all the greatest hits. We get the people from the first movie who never showed up again. We get Anna Kendrick. We get the boy, Riley, the kid who played Riley Beers. It's nice. It's so good.
Every character, including both Bryce Dallas Howard and the other one.
It's nice. It's nice.
Yeah. It's when the final Star Wars film came out, I thought they should have gone back and re-edited the beginning of The Phantom Menace so that it started off with like a full old-time Hollywood slanted cast list of every actor who's going to appear in all 9, like for all 9 movies, like Star Wars starring, because that's what a serial would do. And I believe that any major motion picture like series, the last film has to end with this acknowledgement of every actor who's played every character, including the minorest vampires. You wonder who played the third Irish vampire? You get to know. She didn't even have any lines. There she was. And they were standing there in their tweed and their little page boy caps because they're Irish. I couldn't get over the fact that they treated the Irish characters just like they treated the Irish characters in the original Star Trek series. Remember when they run into the Irish aliens?
Yes, they're cartoons.
And they're like, tar-tar-tar, Shorin Bagora. Oh, what are we on? Some sort of a starship? Like, that's literally what the vampires were like.
So, when I've been to Broadway shows, it's essentially since Broadway reopened post-lockdown, I've noticed that we're acknowledging the musicians a lot more and the stage production crew, like way more often during a curtain call. More people will come out and it'll be the people that you never actually saw or that have been hidden in the pit the whole time, which is very cool. This is that for me. This is my this is my Broadway curtain call. And I think I have also just been, maybe it's because of the weather. Maybe it's because I'm old now. I just cry over things now. And this was like, oh, I actually had a really fun time revisiting this series. And we're going to taint that soon with so much bad parody material. But I really did, like, I treasure how well these movies shape up over time. Because you get the wretched first installment, and then it's like, oh, actually, we know what we're doing. Trust us.
I do appreciate the fact that the first installment has now become the wretched first installment. Like we're openly like just deriding this poor first attempt, this low budge director, like just trying to make a movie that everyone will love.
Well, a thing that both of us noticed at the end, because it's impossible not to notice, is that at the end of the book and in the end of the movie, Bella has learned how to take down her shield enough that she can show Edward her memories.
Yes.
And this is also like, this is part of what made me emotional too, because this is the thing that Edward has always wanted. And Bella worries that she can never give Edward anything like he has given her. And this is her finally being able to do that. And yeah, she's been giving of herself this entire time, but it's nice that she has a material thing she can do now. And in the movie, they show clips from the first movie, but they are not blue. And it's really, it's, I don't want to call it unnerving because it's very good. Like like suddenly you're like, oh, what if that movie hadn't looked as bad as it was? Would I dislike it to the extent that I do?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So
she shows him some really negative memories. It's not a greatest hits reel. She shows him the thing in Volterra. Like, it's bad.
But it's their relationship. And they kind of did this in the last movie too. We saw flashbacks to previous movies. But they pull it off. They make it work again, which really surprised me. I was like, oh, I might have gotten choked up because I got choked up at the wedding. I might have gotten choked up if I didn't have Alana sitting next to me being openly derisive of the entire
experience. I think that may have colored your experience a bit. I watched this one by myself. This was one that I watched alone.
I know Alana's listening to this. Sweetie, I am not blaming you for this. I am not saying that you made this the enjoyment. This is a perfectly enjoyable movie with or without a naysayer present. I probably did not burst into tears at the end because I was a little self-conscious. That's all I'm saying.
Whereas Scott walked in and I was like, not sobbing. I don't want to make this theatrical, but I was crying a lot, like a good amount. And he accused me of somehow having been gaslit into thinking the Twilight movies were good. It's like,
yeah.
I think I probably said, well, I don't know if they're good, but I do know that they're good. That's the problem.
So you asked a question in the last episode that I was unable to answer, but now I'm able to answer it, which is, what was the Mad Magazine title of Breaking Dawn? And I'll have you know there's two, because they did both movies in this thing. The first one was called The Toilet Saga, Sulking Yawn. Sulking Yawn.
That is a long walk.
Which includes, because Mad Magazine does that thing where they make the title the end of a statement. So Bella says at the end of the previous movie, the whole movie has been a 2-hour-long trailer for The Toilet Saga's Sulking Yawn. And then it begins with them getting married, where Charlie says to her, since you came to Sporks, it's called Sporks, not Forks, by the way. You've been hospitalized, clinically depressed, broken your leg and hand, gashed your arm, and survived hypothermia, a treacherous fall, and half a dozen murder attempts. Seems I did a better job protecting you during the 17 years when you were living 1,500 miles away. And now you're going to live in the woods? Does this sparkly bum even have a job? And she says, oh, Daddy, there's no time for sensible concerns. I'm married and we're off to Sex Island. The second movie, though, is called The Toilet Saga. This is an even longer walk. The Toilet Saga, Bleak and Dumb.
No.
Bleak and Dumb. Which does feature Vampire Bella stalking a mountain lion played by TV's Snagglepuss. It ends with the Edward running off with Jacob. Fair.
Cool.
He says, I'm sorry, Rubella. Her name is Rubella, by the way. But our entire relationship was based on frustration, mind games, and abuse. This happily ever after thing will never work, so I'm leaving you for someone who'll treat me the way I need to be treated. Poorly. And then Jacob says, close your pointy mouth, blood boy, and get ready to give me a tick bath. I don't know what that means.
That's funny.
This is the kind of humor you can expect from our upcoming episode on Twilight parodies. There are no fewer than like 5 actual novels that parody these books. 2 major motion pictures.
I can't. I assume we're going to be talking mostly about the movies. This is what we did with the Hunger
You mean
Games.
Vampires Suck and Breaking Wind?
Okay, somebody used Breaking Wind. So that's why I still have hope in this world. Also, I'm still stuck on saying that Eclipse was a 2-hour trailer for Breaking Dawn. That's not true. Eclipse is its own story. Unacceptable.
Yes. If anything, Breaking Dawn is a 2-hour trailer or 4-hour trailer for the following books and rewrites that she does of Twilight, which we'll get to. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We aren't done covering Twilight. But before we move on, what's your ranking? What is your ranking of these movies?
I was gonna say, are books and movies the same? They're absolutely not.
They are not.
I think movie wise, I'm gonna say this is a descending order. Eclipse is the best movie. Acknowledged. Breaking Dawn Part 2. This is where we start diverging, I know.
It's immediately where we start diverging. New
Moon.
Okay.
Breaking Dawn Part 1. Twilight.
And mine is exactly the same, but not. Because I honestly switch both Breaking Dawn movies. Now, as we said...
So good.
There's a sharp drop-off between the fourth and then the fifth. Like, Twilight is kind of not like a distant fifth, but there's a gap there in quality.
It's certainly it's a significant gap. For me, the books are harder, because I think I would still say Eclipse is my favorite, but I do also really like Breaking Dawn. So we'd probably go Eclipse, Breaking Dawn, Twilight, New Moon.
Breaking Dawn as a book, the second half of Breaking Dawn, I wish was a series of books, because we meet these incredible vampires. She's got these cool ideas about their powers, their origins, about the newborns and the juvenile vampire, like turning the whole concept of turning a baby into a vampire. That because when you turn a person into a vampire, they are arrested at that developmental stage. So when you say that Edward is 17 years old, he will always be 17, like mentally, emotionally. He won't ever mature beyond that. He will always be a 17-year-old kid, which is why Bella was so freaked out about growing older than him. Mm-hmm. But you do that to a 2-year-old, they're arrested at 2. You can't teach them to be a better person. They don't even have a moral compass yet. And they're like, one of those baby vampires would just eliminate an entire village. Like, they would just kill everybody in a village without even knowing they were doing anything weird. Which is why it's against the law to turn a child into a vampire, because you cannot train them to control themselves. And I love that concept. I want a book about those eras. I want a book about the Volturi having to track down and yeet children into bonfires.
I mean, I am wondering how, because like most Twilight fanfic is about the main 3 characters, obviously.
Yeah.
I think all of these extra vampires, there's so much going on social dynamics wise in the background of these books. I want more of that. Like, I want to hear about why Kate and Garrett are like, we are disparate souls that are now in love. I want to hear about the Irish potato famine.
Yes, which else seems to have been so traumatic, they've literally never left it. Like, they are still dressing. No, like, give me a book of short stories or novellas written by other vampire writers. Give me Kim Newman doing the guy in the attic. Give me Charlene Harris doing the Nomads. Get me some of that. Give me some lusty writers who know how to like write interpersonal drama, but I want to know these character stories. Basically.
Yeah, there are a couple different Sookie collections. Like, there are Sookie Stackhouse collections that do the same thing, where they pick vampires who have either been in the fringes of the stories, or they just have characters in Bon Temps that aren't vampires but are reacting to them. There's a fun one about like the cops in Bon Temps who are like, we don't know what's going on, which is always I love an outside rube perspective. But it would be good. It would be cool. I don't know if we're ever going to get anything like that with Twilight, although we did just get a new makeup palette, so maybe it's coming truly in vogue again.
It's Stephenie Meyer has gone on record. She has said that she's working on new Twilight stuff, but she's going to publish a different book first. So if we ever see a new Stephenie Meyer book, then we might get the rest of some more Twilight stuff. But I'm afraid that it's just going to be the continuing adventures of Renesmee, and which is interesting. She's a daywalker. She's a half vampire. Is she going to blade out? We don't know. Could be fun.
Is she going to become an assassin of some kind? Who is to say?
Oh, we didn't even talk about the lawyer. They didn't even have to include the lawyer, but they did. Like the Cullens lawyer who's been working, the law firm who's been working for them for decades, which they could have cut all that from the movie and put in a little more character stuff, and I would have been fine. It's interesting in the book.
Then they wouldn't have had to. They wouldn't have gotten to cast Wendell Pierce.
That's true.
It's cool to see him.
And I guess you gotta have as many black people in this series as possible because there just ain't that many.
Dear Lord, yes we do. Okay, well, what are we saying goodbye to this week?
Ooh. Let's say goodbye to, let's just say goodbye to Lee Pace, who I didn't even tell a single story about. I went to high school with him. He once spent the night at my house for a weekend.
It's fun to tell people that.
It is fun to tell people that.
That's all I really need. Goodbye, Lee Pace.
Goodbye, Lee Pace. Call me. If you remember I exist ever, let people know. I bet he doesn't remember I exist. Goodbye, Lee Pace.
Goodbye, Lee Pace.